Chapter 19 The Great Explosion. I remember the next day very clearly. It never returns to my mind without a shudder of horror and my heart pounding. We were hurled along like the playthings of the fierce elements of the deep. The moment drew near to clear away by blasting through the opposing granite boulder. I begged for the honor of lighting the fuse. We calculated the fuse would burn for 10 minutes before setting fire to the mine. I therefore had sufficient time to get away to the raft. I took hold of the end of the match. My uncle stood, chronometer in hand. "Ready?" he cried. "Yes! Fire!" I instantly plunged the end of the fuse into the lantern. It spluttered and flamed, and I ran quickly to the raft. "Come on board quickly and let us push off," my uncle said. Hans, with a vigorous thrust, sent us from the shore. The raft shot 20 fathoms out to sea. It was a moment of intense excitement. My uncle was watching the hand of the chronometer. 5 more minutes, he said. 4, 3. My pulse was beating very quickly. 2, 1. Down, the granite rocks! Down with you, my uncle cried. What took place at that moment? I believe I did not hear the dull roar of the explosion, but the rocks suddenly assumed a new arrangement. I saw a bottomless pit open on the shore. The sea, lashed into sudden fury, rose up in an enormous billow. Our unhappy raft was lifted in the air with all of its crew and cargo. We all 3 fell down flat. In less than a second it became completely dark. Then I felt as if the raft had no support beneath it. I thought it was sinking, but it was not. I wanted to speak to my uncle, but the roaring of the waves prevented him from hearing me. I then understood what had taken place. On the other side of the blown-up rock was an abyss. The explosion had caused a kind of earthquake in this fissured region. A great gulf had opened, and the sea, now changed into a torrent, was hurrying us along into it. We were soon to be sucked into that abyss. We held on to the raft for hours. We felt violent shocks whenever we crashed against the jagged rocks. Yet these shocks were not very frequent. So I concluded that the gully was widening. It was no doubt the same road that Saknussemm had taken. But instead of walking peaceably down it, as he had done, we were carrying a whole sea along with us. To judge by the air, which was whistling past me and making a whizzing sound in my ears, we were moving faster than the fastest trains. Somehow, Hans did manage to light a lantern. We clung to the stump of a mast which had snapped at the first shock of our great catastrophe. Of our instruments, none were saved but the compass and the chronometer. We had only 1 day's worth of food left. I stupidly stared at our failing supplies. I refused to face the greatness of our loss. Even if we had enough food for months, it wouldn't help us get out of the abyss into which we were being hurled. Why should we fear the horrors of famine when death was facing us in many other forms? I wondered grimly what our chances were and decided not to share my thoughts with my uncle. I had the courage to keep silent. I wished to leave him cool and confident. At that moment the light from our lantern burned itself out. Then, like a child, I closed my eyes firmly so I wouldn't have to face the darkness. Our speed doubled. I could tell by the sharpness of the currents that blew past my face. The descent became steeper. I had an impression that we were dropping vertically. My uncle's hand and the vigorous arm of Hans held me fast. Suddenly, after a space of time that I could not measure, I felt a shock. The raft had not struck against any hard resistance, but had suddenly been stopped in its fall. A waterspout, an immense liquid column, was beating up the surface of the waters. I was suffocating. I was drowning. But this sudden flood was not of long duration. In a few seconds I found myself in the air again, which I inhaled with all the force of my lungs. My uncle and Hans were still holding me by the arms, and the raft was still carrying us.